Good evening. My name is Fran Hildebrandt, Chair of Mishpachah, the Modern Jewish Family. On behalf of my co-chairs, Ellen Leonard, Nar Torah Fund Vice President, and Mindy Steinholtz, Health and Wellness Chair, I would like to wish you a healthy and happy New Year and welcome you to our program, How to Best Support a Loved One Facing Cancer. We have combined forces to present what we think is a health issue that continues to be a challenge for the modern Jewish family. I would like to take the opportunity to thank Debbie Kaner-Goldich and Rabbi Ellen Wollensfield for their assistance in planning our program, as well as participating in it this evening. A special thank you to Karen Belena, who is our tech extraordinaire and who will be keeping us online and on track during our program. For those of you who would like to hear it a second time, it's being recorded and will be on our website. As you know, October is designated as Breast Cancer Awareness Month. 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime, and 1 in 8 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer. Our speaker tonight is no stranger to WLCJ. Melissa Rosen has presented at our 2017 convention, and then again at Personal Conversations with Vivian Lieber. It was when Melissa was a guest speaker at Convention 2017 that I first became aware of Sharsheret and all the services that they provide. I was especially interested because at that time, my husband was in treatment for prostate cancer. My experience, our experience, is not unusual. Many of us on this call tonight have experienced cancer or have family and friends who have suffered from cancer. I know that one of the feelings that I experienced was helplessness. What could I do to support my husband and my children as he navigated his illness? Of course, we often assume that we will know instinctively how to best support them, what to say or not, what to do or not. But that is not always the case. Tonight's program is designed to focus on what we can say, what we can do to provide support as our family member or friend navigates their illness. One last thought. This discussion is not just about cancer. We will hopefully be able to apply the suggestions we received tonight to any and all sorts of illness that is debilitating and life-limiting, as well as life-threatening. And now it is my privilege to invite Debbie Kaner-Goldich, International President of Women's League for Conservative Judaism, to say a few words.
Thank you, Fran. Shalom, friends. Good evening. I hope you all had a meaningful Yom Kippur. It gives me great pleasure to open this meeting tonight and welcome back Sharsheret to our Women's League program. As you heard Fran say, we have partnered with them many times. And it's most appropriate during this month of Breast Cancer Awareness Month of October. I want to thank Fran Hildebrandt, Dr. Ellen Leonard, Dr. Mindy Steinholtz for bringing this important conversation to us. And we welcome Melissa Rosen tonight. Thank you to all of you who continue to support all of our initiatives and show up. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie, for your warm and welcoming words. I would now like to ask, I'm sorry, I got distracted by what came across the screen. I thought it was telling me that I was still muted. I apologize. So repeating myself, which I cannot say too many times, thank you, Debbie, for your warm and welcoming words. You always have something special to say to us, and I appreciate that. I would now like to ask Ellen to introduce Melissa and Sharsheret.
Thank you, Fran. Sharsheret is a national nonprofit organization that strives to improve the lives of Jewish women and families living with or at increased genetic risk for breast or ovarian cancer through personalized support. While their focus is on young women and Jewish families as related to breast and ovarian cancer, Sharsheret programs serve all women and men. Sharsheret cultivates community by bringing together women, families, caregivers, healthcare professionals, and others through national webinars offering expert medical information, healthy living opportunities, and Jewish spirituality experiences for thousands of women facing breast and ovarian cancer. They invite all who reach out to them, regardless of economic or social status, and do not discriminate on the basis of race, color, ethnic origin, national origin, creed, religion, political belief, gender, sexual orientation, marital status, or age. Melissa Rosen is Sharsheret's Director of Training and Education. She holds a master's degree in Jewish communal service from Brandeis University and has been working in the nonprofit sector for over 30 years. Her professional experience includes informal education and programming, advocacy, and community outreach. Melissa's work has allowed her to facilitate unique and lasting connections among organizations in the diverse American community. Melissa oversees community education throughout the country. She trains healthcare professionals, Jewish professionals, and Sharsheret's volunteers. She also manages Sharsheret's community partnerships. She is herself a two-time cancer survivor, and she's passionate about the Jewish community, cancer support, and advocacy. And we are lucky to have her here tonight. Just a few housekeeping items. First of all, if you are on the screen as iPad or your phone, please rename yourself so we know who you are. Second of all, please keep yourself muted until and unless you're asked to speak. And thirdly, put all questions in the chat and they will go directly to me. And at the end, there will be time for question and answer, and I'll go through the questions in the chat and select what Fran and I think would be the most important ones for everybody to hear about. And now, without further ado, I'd like Melissa to speak.
Thank you so very much. First, I want to start by thanking Women's League, the leadership, Fran, Debbie, Ellen, Mindy, and everyone else for having Sharsheret back, and to all of you for joining us tonight to learn more. Tonight, we're going to talk about a few things. I want to introduce you to Sharsheret for those of you who are unfamiliar or were unaware we have some new programs. I want to talk about what's Jewish about breast cancer. Of course, we want to talk about caring for a friend or loved one and how our communities across the country can become caring communities. And we're going to talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted the way we care. So for those of you who have heard of Sharsheret but don't know so much about it, I just want to share a few details. First of all, we're a national nonprofit organization, and that's the official line. We are also unintentionally international, and we've provided support to those not only in Canada and Israel, but South and Central America, all across Europe. So I guess we really are international. We have been around for more than 20 years. And what started as a small volunteer organization in a small corner of Northeastern America is now an organization with over 30 staff people and 4 administrative offices across the country, and we support people in every state. Sharsheret has 2 buckets. That's the best way to think about it. We have our clinical bucket and our education and outreach bucket. So education and outreach is exactly what we're doing tonight. We do educational programs throughout the country, and we talk about things like how to be proactive about your own health, Jewish genetics, how to support someone facing cancer. And we do this at congregations and nonprofit organizations like JFSs and JCCs, and places of work and more. And then, of course, our clinical team, which strives to provide psychosocial support, free psychosocial support to anyone impacted by breast cancer, by ovarian cancer, or by a higher risk of cancer because of a strong family history or a known genetic mutation. We do that through a team of clinicians, social workers, and a genetic counselor. And we also have all sorts of amazing programs to help families navigate their cancer experience. Everything from peer support, a caregivers program, a program specifically for families dealing with cancer while raising young children, a survivorship program we've created with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We offer subsidies for some non-medical expenses related to self-esteem, like the purchase and styling of a human hair wig, microblading, semi-permanent eyebrow tattoos, and so much more. And of course, our social workers and genetic counselor, like I said, are always there to talk to people. So one of the most common questions we get is, why a Jewish organization? I mean, there are so many great cancer organizations out there, and specifically breast cancer organizations. And the good news is we work with so many of them. It's a very collaborative field, but the reason hasn't changed in the 20-some years we've been around. First, Jews of Ashkenazi descent have a 10 times the risk of carrying a BRCA mutation, which raises the chance of a diagnosis, 10 times the risk of the general population. And second, everybody, no matter where they're from or who they are, deserves culturally meaningful support when facing a life-altering or life-threatening diagnosis. You know, interestingly, study after study has proven that patients who have non-medical needs met, like cultural support, do better. They do better physically. So we're going to talk about some of that support today. The reality is that receiving a breast cancer diagnosis is overwhelming and isolating and frightening. Receiving any serious diagnosis is. And I want to make a statement that may seem counterintuitive. Breast cancer is not just a personal issue. It is a communal issue as well. It doesn't just affect our sisters, our friends, our mothers, our daughters, but it impacts our partners, our husbands, our brothers, our sons, our fathers. And the Jewish community can be an amazing source of comfort and support to anyone facing a difficult diagnosis. And COVID has made receiving support and providing support both more complicated, but even more important. You know, the rest of the world has sort of tentatively stepped beyond COVID restrictions at this moment, but that's not always true in the oncology world. People who are dealing with cancer may be a bit more cautious. So those facing cancer still in today's world may not be able to have a friend or family member accompany them to doctor's appointments, chemotherapy infusions, or surgeries. They may be alone during these times of heightened stress. They may not be able to receive visits while recovering at home or run to the market because they're immunocompromised and their risks are higher now than they ever were before. As I mentioned, a cancer diagnosis is a time of great stress, feelings of isolation, and also information overload. The pandemic, and still what's left of the pandemic, has amplified an already difficult time. But there's some ways that we can help to lessen both the physical and emotional burdens. I know myself from 2 different cancer diagnoses how wonderful the community can be. Within a week, each time I had childcare, rides, meals, and more. I knew I had good friends, and I knew I was a valued member of the community. On occasion, Sharsheret receives a call from a woman who's concerned that people she knows are upset with her. And we're always a little confused. Wait, what? How could that be? Well, it turns out the answer is usually some version of the same story. Somebody asked them what they could do to help, and the Sharsheret caller didn't have an answer. And all those well-meaning souls were frustrated that they didn't have a way to help. So here's kind of what we gleaned from these calls. It is possible, and when I say possible, that's a euphemism. It is definitely true that offering support is not as instinctive as we believe it to be. So with that in mind, let's explore some of the best ways we can offer support to someone in need. So first, say something. You know, I have a friend who was recently diagnosed with breast cancer, and she confided in me that so many people had approached her, offering her words of comfort, but 2 mutual friends, 2 close mutual friends, hadn't said a word. And I said, well, of course, they must have asked your husband. And she said, no. She said to me, I know I shouldn't waste my energy focusing on this, but I'm not sure I can get past the hurt, she said to me. All I could say to her is, you know what? Cancer stirs such difficult emotions in all of us. But she's right. It's never okay. It's never wise to ignore someone's diagnosis. It is, however, perfectly okay to say, I don't know what to say, or simply, I'm thinking of you. So many people wait until they've crafted the perfect message, but that's not what someone who's been diagnosed is looking for. They're just looking to know you care. Of course, there are times you should not say something. Saying things like, I know just how you feel, or I have a friend who had that, is simply not relevant. Everyone's cancer is different. And in fact, breast cancer itself is actually 11 distinct diagnoses, each with their own treatment protocols and outcomes. Additionally, everyone reacts to treatment differently. Her experience is uniquely her own. So you should follow her lead and validate her feelings. She may want to talk specifically about things other than her cancer. So maybe this is time to catch up on a favorite TV show you both watch, or share a little harmless gossip. Or she may choose to limit the cancer conversation to logistics, meals, surgery, childcare. Then help her organize. Yet again, she may want to talk about her diagnosis. Let her vent her frustrations or share her fears with you. Don't feel you need to solve her problems because you can't. Just be there. Just listen. Number 2, do something. We have say something, and now we have do something. Cancer treatment is debilitating and can be overwhelming. But please, 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 just don't ask, what can I do to help? Doing that places the onus on the patient. It's possible she doesn't know what she needs. It also may be that what she needs isn't possible due to particular pandemic restrictions. And we all know that it's incredibly difficult for some of us to ask for help, especially when we're used to being the one that provides help in our community. So the best thing to do is to offer specifics. Say, I'm headed to Target. Do you need toilet paper, milk? Can I pick up a magazine for you? Or, I'd like to drop off dinner. Is Thursday at 6 p.m. okay? If you don't need it now, it's freezable. Just pop it in. You'll have it whenever you need it. Or how about something like, I'm taking my kids hiking on Sunday. Would your kids like to join? That's probably safe. It's an outdoor activity, gets the kids out of the house. These are things you might offer to anyone facing illness, but they are particularly important at this moment. They may not just be too tired to go food shopping. It may be dangerous for them to do so. Certain cancer treatments make people very, very immunocompromised. Again, so note that hiking is intentionally an outdoor activity. Reassure the person facing cancer that you are vaccinated, if you are, and if you're not, please find another way to help, perhaps sending flowers, texting support. There are other things you can do that may require just a bit more, but are also so incredibly important. One of the most helpful things that I found in my own experiences was to have a friend accompany me to all of my appointments. Now, this may or may not be possible now, but we've actually encouraged people to take a friend with them by using a cell phone and just having it on speaker. Because the information is often foreign and overwhelming. Being upset makes it harder to process. My friend took notes and referred to them often. If this is something you would feel comfortable with, you can offer your services to a good friend. I see that somebody put in the chat box, wanted to know if it was just only about breast and ovarian. So Sharsheret is a breast and ovarian cancer organization, but so much of what I'm talking about now would be appropriate for any cancer diagnosis and any significant illness, diagnosis of a significant illness. That is likely impossible for the moment, like I said, but if someone does need that extra support, we might suggest either phoning or videoing in and taking notes and asking questions remotely. You could also offer to be a conduit of information to friends and community members. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's actually exhausting to constantly need to respond to well-meaning inquiries. Or you might offer to coordinate meals. Two great websites that I'm sure you're familiar with are Take Them a Meal and Meal Train. And some of these websites actually have an opportunity to update so that the person who's facing the illness can choose to, blog. I use that word very loosely, blog there to let people know what's going on, or somebody else can take responsibility and provide updates. Okay, so 1 is say something, 2 is do something, and 3 is to support the cause. You could run or walk in this month it would be breast cancer race in their honor. Last month it was ovarian. Last month it was also prostate cancer awareness month. November is caregivers awareness month. There's always something going on. If she's blogging about her experience, be sure to read it. You could make an appropriate donation in her honor, or donate your hair to an organization that creates wigs for those who are losing hair due to chemotherapy. These are only a few of the so many things that can be done to support someone facing cancer. Tomorrow morning, you will receive an email from me through Women's League, and I will include a handout that lists many, many, many more ideas, and we can discuss more during the Q&A as well. But whatever you choose to do, the most important thing to keep in mind is to let the person who is facing the illness set the tone. Ask, but don't be offended if she doesn't accept. She may have all the meals she needs or be too tired to go out for coffee or have coffee even by Zoom. She may be immunocompromised, not be able to enjoy a visit no matter how much she would like it. Inquire, but don't be offended if she doesn't respond. In fact, ending a card, a text message, a voice note with the phrase "no need to respond" is a huge gift, even in and of itself. Because the reality is there'll be plenty of times that someone will want to talk, will be bored, will be feeling like they have a little bit of a surge of energy. And then there will be other times where the treatment has just been so draining. the treatment will have been just so draining that they really can't, it's too much energy to type a response. The other thing you can do is let them know that Sharsheret is there for them if it's breast or ovarian cancer. By the way, a great deal of women we work with, their first point of contact with Sharsheret was through a friend or family member, somebody else who called to get information to help a friend through the diagnostic process. I do want to say, we are a breast and ovarian cancer organization, and for those who know they're at heightened diagnostic risk, but we often get calls from people who fall outside of our expertise, and we help them however we can. We help people who have a different cancer altogether, but are really struggling. Like at this time of year, around the high holidays, they're struggling because they're worried about going to synagogue and having to recite Unatana Tokef, or they're struggling because Tashlach has always been their favorite thing and they won't be able to go this year, or any number of reasons. If somebody has a different cancer and they're struggling with some of the places where cancer and Judaism intersect, we certainly help those people. And if somebody has a different cancer and needs other information, they can call Sharsheret and say, do you have a connection at an organization that works with people who have male breast cancer or prostate cancer or lung cancer or whatever it is? And very often we will make that connection for them, make an email connection so that they don't have to worry about tracking down a contact, a telephone number, things like that. Okay, so I want to talk for a couple of minutes about how to support someone in your community, not one-on-one, but as a community, as a whole, so that the community actually becomes a community of comfort, because that is, of course, what we want all of our communities to be. So again, let me reiterate this interesting fact. Study after study has proven that patients whose non-medical needs are met have better medical outcomes. That may seem counterintuitive, it may seem irrelevant, but it's true. So what does that mean? When we think non-medical needs, we're thinking about finances, childcare, rides to treatment. Absolutely. And that's what all the social workers in the cancer centers think of too. What people often forget is culture and faith are a part of that basket of non-medical needs. So when we are taking away some of the anxiety by helping in those ways, with very practical or in some cases spiritual needs, then we're actually helping people get through treatment with fewer complications, live longer, and not only survive, but thrive. Obviously, these are studies and generalizations, but the studies, every time they're repeated, they have the same result. Okay. I want to say that, excuse me for a second, I wanted to say that when we talk about non-medical needs and we talk about addressing someone's cultural and religious needs, what are some examples of that? Well, it could be helping prepare for a Chag. This coming week, somebody might need help building a sukkah so that they can perform the mitzvah of eating in a sukkah. Somebody might need help picking up a lulav and etrog from the synagogue, or getting a meal so that they can go out and do it. So what is it that communities as a whole can do to help and meet these needs? Okay, so just like we had 3 things in the first part, we're going to do 3 things again. Educate. A shul can offer awareness programs to not only train and support caregivers, but to educate about genetics, about hereditary cancers in the Jewish community. They can offer programs that give both men and women the tools to be proactive about their health, to feel empowered taking care of themselves. Providing this education sets a tone, right? It may not feel like that's helping somebody, but what it does is set a community tone that prioritizes self-care. And we know from some studies that we've done that when we do that, when we come in or when you do it and you offer programs that educate people how to be proactive, that saves lives. These programs can be hybrid, completely online, in person, depending on what's going on in your geographic area. But again, remember, the community sets a tone, and allowing for remote access to all possible programs not only reminds people that your organization is COVID aware, but it's inclusive of all. There are people in your community that for personal health reasons will not be able to join in person long after most of us are comfortable doing so. And that's really important. Again, it sets a tone. You know, I hope I don't have this in later, because I want to throw something in now. We talk about inclusiveness a lot in our communities, but when we talk about inclusiveness, we're often talking about people with physical disabilities or things like that. I want every one of us to remember that people facing illness are very isolated, and they should be part of that conversation of inclusion. And it may be permanent, and it may be temporary, and it's irrelevant. We have to get that message out there that being ill doesn't make someone a less valuable member of our community. And that is really important. Okay, so education. Number 2, respect. Every patient has a right to decide how much information to disclose and who to share it with. Thankfully, the majority of rabbis and clergy make themselves available and are welcoming to congregants in need. In fact, at Sharsheret, we encourage women to consider their rabbi a part of their treatment team to offer important spiritual support, because the reality is that a cancer diagnosis is physical, emotional, and spiritual. If a patient shares a diagnosis with the rabbi, it's perfectly acceptable for them to ask the rabbi to not share with anyone, not the synagogue president, not their spouse, no one. A patient is allowed to say, it's okay to share with the Bikor Cholim committee, but nobody else. Or a patient may be open about their diagnosis. I also want to point out that it's perfectly acceptable for someone to change their minds. Perhaps they've been open, but then their status has changed. Maybe cancer's recurred or something similar. People have their own reasons for how they decide to share their diagnosis and why they decide to share or not share. They may want to share in the knowledge and experience of community members who've shared their diagnosis in the past. They may want to be private for the sake of their kids. There are so many factors that go into disclosure decisions, so please, please respect them. Number 3 is what you would have expected: support. There are so many practical things that congregations can do, in addition to what individuals do, to create a community of care. If a woman is willing and open about her diagnosis, a congregation can send updates via email. Not only, again, does this take the burden of an often exhausted patient from responding to many, many inquiries, but it keeps community members who genuinely care about this person updated. A congregation can send out specific needs, such as meals or play dates. Please remember, of course, that many of these needs will be altered for as long as the pandemic is with us. But some ideas that are COVID safe include homework help for children over Zoom. And that's a great mitzvah project for a youth group or someone who is about to become bar mitzvah. Coffee dates with the person facing illness or the caregiver over Zoom. Please, let's not forget to care for the person's primary caregiver. Outdoor play dates, porch drop-offs for meals or other supplies. For congregants who want to maintain some level of privacy, many congregations have either active Bikor Cholim committees or Tehillim groups to visit those who are facing illness. Obviously, volunteers with these synagogue groups are trained already to know that what they learn through their volunteer work is confidential. But even for a patient who wants to maintain their privacy, which to reaffirm is perfectly appropriate, there are many things that can be done as a community. Some congregations have set up special committees that allow a congregant who's ill to receive meals or have errands run. The request is public, but the recipients are only known by 1 or 2 people. So if a person needs meals, the meal might get dropped off at the synagogue office and somebody else picks it up and brings it over, or something like that. So to close, I want to reiterate that a cancer diagnosis, any diagnosis, is so overwhelming and so challenging and so alienating. Be reminded that they're still an important part of the community, and to hear that or to feel that way is so invaluable. A cancer diagnosis is a life-changing experience. The way the Jewish community comes together to respect and support a family may well determine the family's commitment to the community and to Judaism as a whole. So be there for them. And one special note, caring for the caregiver. I just mentioned it for the first time, but I want to address it because it's really important. As a caregiver, whether that caregiver is a spouse, a partner, a parent, an adult child, a best friend, anyone offering support, be aware of your own needs. The person you're caring for, that cancer diagnosis will impact you emotionally as well. And so it's so important to have a support system of your own, whether that's a friend, a colleague, the rabbi, a social worker. As a caregiver, a friend or family member, you can also call Sharsheret and speak with a member of our clinical team to receive resources through our Family Focus program. By taking care of yourself, you will better be able to support the person you love. I do have a couple of last minute details I want to talk about, but this would be a great time to take a break and answer any questions that have come in. So
We had a few questions.
okay.
One was, what would be different about caring for somebody who's had the diagnosis long-term and now suddenly has a difference in their diagnosis? So somebody who's been stable for many, many years and now all of a sudden maybe has taken a turn for the worse, and you're almost back to square one.
Right. That is incredibly frustrating and upsetting. I will say that for patients who are dealing with advanced or metastatic disease, and that could be after years and years and years of after original diagnosis, or it could be at the start of the diagnosis. It all depends on when a diagnosis is discovered or is made. I think the important thing is when it's a long-term thing, people, the community around, tend to forget that support still may be needed, both for the patient and the caregiver. I think because cancer is such a scary word for so many people, we all want it to be over. The same thing happens, by the way, when somebody has gone through a year of treatment and is done without evidence of disease. The people around her want to say, oh, that's great, that's good, let's get back to normal, when it takes a long time to get back to normal. It's because people want to think your pain is over, your suffering is over. But I always encourage clergy members, community members to check in on a regular basis. Yes, it's been a long road, and it may be much longer, it may be getting more difficult, but even if you've been providing that support, remember that there are lots of periods of time, different moments in time that are part of a cancer experience where the need for support is higher than others. A recurrence, the end of active treatment, even with a good outcome, when there's a scan coming up, right? Most cancer survivors get scans on a regular basis. Maybe it starts out every 3 months, then goes to every 6 months, and then annually for a while. Those scan days for some patients are incredibly stressful. So, if you're close enough to know when those points in time come, remember that no matter how long you've been supporting someone, they continue to need your support. And the caregiver too, again, the caregiver too. Sometimes I think it's harder to be a caregiver than the patient. You know, both times when I was ill, I had things to do. I had an agenda that had been set for me by the oncologist. And I looked at my children and my spouse and my parents, and they seemed so much worse off than I did because I was doing all I could. I had a task list that needed to be done medically, and so I was distracted by that while they had time to think about it. So for some situations, the caregiver may need more help, especially emotional or psychosocial help.
Another question, how do we go about coordinating between Sharsheret and the secular cancer organizations we're receiving services from, especially if the secular organization is resistant?
Resistant? So that's interesting because we partner with so many of them, and really resistance, we've not encountered that at all. So, and by the way, we actually have what we call Sharsheret community partners, which are nonprofit organizations, whether it's like a JFS or a cancer support community or a Gilda's Club around the country. And they refer to us all the time because the way we define our support is it's in conjunction with one another. You know, everybody at these organizations, whether they're secular or religious, and religious isn't even the right word because it's not religious stuff we're providing most of the time. Take what you can from each organization, 100%. If somebody doesn't want to say, oh, by the way, here's another organization, although we hear that happen all the time. Just today, I got a call from someone from St. Louis, the cancer support community there recommended they reach out to us. And she's going to continue to get support at Cancer Support Community and through Sharsheret. There's no such thing as too much support. And in many cases, we offer different types of support. So I say, take it from wherever you can get it. And if you're not being referred, pick up, which you may not be, pick up the phone. If you're not being referred, it may not be because they want to keep you for themselves. It's just they didn't think of it. And we refer to other organizations all the time. Again, we're not pushing people off. We're saying, okay, we can help you with this, and this. But I noticed you mentioned that. We can't help with that, but this organization can. Let me do an email introduction for you.
And is there a difference in providing support for somebody who's young, let's say a young woman with children versus somebody who's say 80 years old and has a recurrence in a second breast, but she's now at the end of her life and has a different way of looking at her diagnosis? I actually had that happen. I was my husband had, my first husband had colon cancer, and we were in a cancer support group. And there was a woman there who was 80 years old and, or in her 80s, and had been cancer-free for 25 years and had a very different way of looking at her life than many of the younger people who were there.
Of course, that makes so much sense. Yes, there are not only different ways to physically treat the cancer, which is obviously not what we do, but there are very different ways to support a person going through it. What I will say, though, is we always at Sharsheret take the lead of the caller. We call the women who call us, or the caregivers that call us, callers. So we take their lead. Listen, it may be that if somebody is young and unmarried, we might talk to them about fertility preservation and making sure they ask those questions, where obviously we wouldn't do that for a woman who calls us in her 60s, 70s, or 80s. We're definitely going to offer a younger woman who's got young kids a busy box and talk to them about how to talk about cancer in developmentally appropriate ways. There are certainly different services that we offer to each group. And in terms of the conversations themselves, you're right, they tend to be different. But those are conversations that we have that follow the lead of the person that that has called us. So we're not going to make any assumptions necessarily about that, but I will tell you, we have a peer support network that's 20,000 women strong, and we match not only on exact diagnosis. Again, it could be that someone carries a BRCA mutation and they're pre-Viber, they haven't been diagnosed. It could be someone has ovarian cancer. It could be someone has hormone receptor positive breast cancer, triple negative breast cancer, any number, inflammatory breast cancer. So by exact diagnosis, by stage of life, is someone young and unmarried? Is someone got teens or toddlers in their house? Is someone an empty nester? Because all of those things change a person's cancer experience. And if relevant to the caller, their relationship to Judaism, how important is it to them? How might it impact? And so we really make those very customized connections, because all of those things are important to getting the right psychosocial support.
I don't see any more questions in the chat. If anybody has a question, could you please?
If I can interrupt, I got a question that was sent to me directly. So someone asked about men diagnosed with breast cancer, which I know is a little bit off topic tonight, but I can say a couple of words about it, absolutely. And those words start with the acronym BRCA. So we've all heard about BRCA mutations, and we know that those of Ashkenazi Jewish descent are 10 times more likely to carry a BRCA mutation that raises cancer risk than the general population. When I started at Sharsheret, we were a breast cancer organization with a really strong ovarian cancer program. A few years later, we were told we need to say breast, ovarian, and related cancers. Today, we're not allowed to use the phrase related cancers. We have to list the cancers that BRCA increased risks for, because it's so clear. So when I talk about BRCA risk, we talk about ovarian cancer, we talk about breast cancer, we talk about prostate cancer, we talk about male breast cancer, we talk about pancreatic cancer, and we talk about melanoma, believe it or not. So all of those cancers are related. It is true that men get breast cancer so infrequently in comparison to women. But if a man has a breast cancer diagnosis, genetic testing is definitely warranted. But you see the cancers that I mentioned, some of them are just women's cancer, some of them are just men's cancer, some of them are for anybody. Again, not just a women's issue, a community issue. And by the way, as long as we've sort of veered a little bit off topic, I just want to remind you all that men and women carry BRCA mutations in equal numbers and pass them down to male and female children in equal numbers. So if you're at a doctor and they ask for the history of cancer in your family, it's not just your maternal side, it's your paternal side too. So critically important. I saw somebody asked in the chat, why October for Breast Cancer Awareness Month? I don't have an answer to that, except to say that Sharsheret finds it incredibly inconvenient between the holidays and Breast Cancer Awareness Month. But it is what we, listen, people are diagnosed year-round, and we certainly don't limit the education and support to October, but we'd be silly not to ride the wave of awareness that happens in October, so we can move people from awareness to education to action. But we do have something in February also called Sharsheret Pink Day. It's actually an international effort for more educational programs in February, so.
There was another question that says, do you create Zoom chats? You mentioned support groups.
So we don't do traditional support groups through Sharsheret, but many of our community partners do. And so, if somebody's interested, they can reach out to our clinical team and find out if there's a local group that does that. Or if you're interested in starting a local group, some of our community partners are places you would expect there to be a support group like JFS or Cancer Support Communities. But I'm working with, I think, 3 synagogues at this point that offer their own support groups. And there are 2 types of support groups. There's like a process-based support group that needs to be run by a social worker or mental health professional. But there's another type of support group called an experiential support group that's run by volunteers with the support of Sharsheret. And instead of people sitting down and talking about how they're doing this week, instead what it is different programs that would support anyone facing a cancer at any stage. So one week a doctor might come in and talk about intimacy after a diagnosis. Maybe another week a nutritionist month, a nutritionist comes and talks about healthy eating during and after cancer. Maybe somebody does yoga, leads yoga, goes on a hike. I've had some of these groups give something back to the community. They're so grateful and they want to give back. Pack Passover food packages through JFS, help a synagogue youth group with something, or read in the nursery school or stuff like that. If you're interested in doing that kind of programming with the support of Sharsheret, definitely reach out to me and I can talk to you and anybody appropriate more about that. But we do other things. We have Facebook groups that are moderated by our social workers, and there's one for our Embrace community, which is advanced or metastatic. There's one for people who carry mutations, whether they've been diagnosed with cancer or not. There's one specifically for caregivers, and then there's one for anybody who's been diagnosed stages 0 to 3. And they're all very, very supportive, particularly the last one I mentioned. It's really very, very active. And so that's another way to get support. Okay,
a couple of more questions. One is that Jewish women are encouraged to be tested for the BRCA gene. Should Jewish men also be tested for that gene, especially men with prostate cancer? And if a father has prostate cancer, can he pass cancer genes to his daughter?
Okay. You're asking a lot of questions at once, so let's break it down a little bit. First of all, let me explain there are 2 types of testing. It's very rare today that somebody just gets tested for BRCA. Really, the only way to do that is to go through a 23andMe or an Ancestry. And all of those results need to be confirmed by a medical grade test anyway. These days, almost all of the tests are what are known as panel screening. So yes, the 3 BRCA, most common BRCA mutations, but there are other genes that raise risk too. They may not have such a heightened prevalence within our community, but people within our community have them. So genes like CHEK2, PALB2, ATM, things like that. So when people go today, if they're getting a medical grade screening, they're getting a panel test. Years ago, it was just BRCA. So if you're someone who got tested years ago, it might be worth getting retested. Let's talk. So that's one thing. The second thing I wanted to mention was community-wide screening. There are advocates who believe that anyone with Ashkenazi genetics in them should be getting genetic testing. There are others who think only those who kind of medically qualify should get it. What I will say is this. Men and women, when appropriate, should be getting this testing. In other words, the deciding factor is not gender here. The deciding factor is personal health and family cancer history or a known mutation in your family. I'm going to give you a personal example. On my father's side, not my mother's side, my grandmother was diagnosed with pancreatic, my aunt with breast, and my cousin with ovarian. Now, up until a few years ago, those may have seen, or maybe a little more than a few years ago, those may have seemed as completely unrelated cancers. Now we know it's a straight BRCA line. Turns out my father didn't inherit that line, so it didn't get passed to me because it's a 50% chance with every child. But so whether in your family there's any of those cancers I mentioned, and by the way, you might want to include in that colorectal cancers, uterine cancer. There's some thought that maybe not BRCA, but there's another mutation that raises that risk. So if you have a variety of cancers, certainly if you all have one cancer, but even if there are a variety of cancers, it is worth having the conversation about genetic testing. Sharsheret believes that everybody should think to make an informed decision about whether or not to test, to have genetic testing. In other words, find out your family's cancer history, find out if anybody had a known mutation, find out these things, and then decide. Talk to your primary care physician, your OBGYN, call Sharsheret's genetic counselor or talk to a local genetic counselor and decide based on family history and all the other things you know, whether it makes sense to get that genetic testing or to retake it, depending on when the last time you took it is, because every few years, there are more things added to the panel screening. So again, long answer to those questions, but gender is the least important thing when making a decision as to whether or not to test. I got another private question here. Somebody asked about how a caregiver balances the patient's desire for privacy with well-meaning family and friends noticing they haven't heard from that person and they're calling and asking questions. That is a great question. I would add to that even and say, how does one balance the patient's desire for privacy with the caregiver's need for support? It's both. So in terms of what I just added, I would tell you very simply, call Sharsheret. We can be there for you. We can be the person you vent to. And then you may want to ask the patient, can I just talk to the rabbi, or can I just tell my best friend and we'll keep it between us, but I need a little support too. The other question, the original question's a little harder actually, because people care and people want to know. And I think at a certain point, something needs to be said if people are asking questions, and you'll have to make that decision together with the patient. Certainly at the beginning, during a diagnostic process or the start of something, the start of not feeling well, or even maybe the start of treatment, they're easy enough to push off. Oh yes, lots going on these days, things like that. But at a certain point, that becomes a ridiculous answer. And I think it has to be a conversation that's had with the patient itself and his or herself. And it could be that together you choose to tell just a small amount of people. It could be just, oh, she's going through something right now. When she's ready, she'll talk about it, but thank you for checking in. I'll let her know, or I'll let him know. That is not an easy one. It really isn't. I also got another question. What about the risk of breast, ovarian, and pancreatic cancers among Jewish people of color? What does the organization do to increase awareness, diagnosis, treatment, and support for this population? Great question. So in terms of level of risk, we're talking really about generalities because, first of all, while Jews of Ashkenazi descent are at 10 times greater risk to carry these mutations, some of these mutations, first of all, carrying a mutation doesn't guarantee a diagnosis. It does raise risk dramatically, but it doesn't guarantee a diagnosis. Second of all, people who are outside of the Ashkenazi, genetic bubble, so to speak, also carry BRCA. Angelina Jolie is a great example of that. And maybe more importantly, in the 21st century, there's really no way to know if someone actually carries Ashkenazi, is of Ashkenazi descent. First of all, There's a lot of intermarriage between Sephardi, Mizrahi, and Ashkenazi, and it may be that your family is primarily Sephardi, but you don't know that you had a grandparent that was Ashkenazi. Or there may have been intermarriage in between religions, or from different ethnic backgrounds and things like that, through conversions, through whatever. The point is that nobody really knows their full genetic story, and so if there are other reasons to test, then testing should be done. Nobody's going to say, oh, I'm part of a community of color, so this isn't relevant to me, because we don't know. Somewhere in our family trees, we don't know what's there. Mizrahi, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, people from different faiths, people from different cultures and parts of the world. But I will tell you an interesting thing here, which is it's not just Ashkenazi Jews that have raised risk. It's any insular community. So I've been told the Inuit community in Alaska, been told the Haitian community. That gets a lot of play in Florida and things like that. That's where I learned it from my Florida colleagues, because they did a program specifically on risk in minority communities, and somebody from the Haitian community presented. Any place there's an insular community. With us, of course, it was because we wanted to maintain our faith, and sometimes we weren't allowed to marry outside of our faith. So mutations amplified, and it doesn't matter why the community is insular. It could be geographic, it could be anti-Semitism. If there's a mutation, that mutation gets amplified in an insular community. But in terms of psychosocial support as opposed to risk, we offer all the same things, and any concerns that a caller has that they bring up, we address. So absolutely, again, open to anyone, no matter their faith, no matter their ethnicity, no matter their race, whatever it is. Another question came in to me privately, asked about, oh no, that was the one I just read, never mind. Were there any other questions?
I have
Yes.
One other question. Well, I have a comment from from my co-host Fran, saying, our Jewish Family Service offers genetic testing at a reduced price. Women should check with their own community resources to see if that's available. And then there was one more question that said, and this will be the last one, what % of people do you think have ovarian or other cancers without having the BRCA gene?
I can tell you for breast cancer, the average, about 12% of women will receive, which is 1 in 8, which will receive a breast cancer diagnosis in their lifetime. For someone who carries a BRCA mutation, depending on exactly what mutation it is, that risk isn't 12%, it's up to 88%. For ovarian cancer, in the general population, less than 2%. For someone who carries a BRCA mutation, again, depending on exactly what mutation it is, that risk is close to 60%.
Okay. Yes. My sister recently, she's going into her 5th year after having ovarian cancer. She's going to get her last testing November. So she didn't know for 3 years whether she had the BRCA gene or not, because her oncologist never really checked her for everything that. So I got tested and I did not have the BRCA gene. And finally, last year, she got tested and she does not have the BRCA gene. So then that's when I thought, well, wait a minute. Now, about my father's been gone 15 years. 20 years ago, my father had prostate cancer. And then I was wondering how maybe, is that a possibility that he passed along these genes to his daughters? But neither one of us had the BRCA gene. So
See if you had a full panel.
We had a full panel, but it was And it was very daunting because my oncologist, because I'm seeing somebody for something else, said we have to be tested. And if she has it, or if she didn't have it, then I didn't have to have it. I said, no, we're going to do this, right? You must do it for yourself. Even if your doctor tells you your sister doesn't or does have it, you have to check it out. Do you agree?
Yes, very, very important. Would you mind me asking the age of onset for both your father and sister?
Well, my father's was like, well, he passed away from, he was 75, and my sister is now 70. She's a year younger than me, so she's 73
So a couple of thoughts. One is,
or 72. Yeah.
we're usually more concerned about mutations when the diagnoses are younger. It's true, but you have two diagnoses in your family that could potentially be related. So the two things I would say is ask your genetic counselor if enough new mutations have been added to the standard panel that it's worth doing again. And this is it's a difficult thing to say, but when you get a clean panel back, what that tells you is that you have no known mutations. That doesn't mean that there isn't a mutation that will be found 5 years from now that hasn't been identified yet. And if there's a lot of cancer in one's family, whether you test positive for mutations or not, you should be talking to your doctor about heightened cancer screening. Because the field of genetics changes all the time. I am getting the signs that we need to go. So I just wanted to finish with a couple of words and then I'll turn it back to Fran. Listen, I'm going to put my email address. That's what I'm trying to say. My email address in here, but you'll also get an email from me again via Women's League. So you'll have it. If you have any questions or want me to connect you to a member of our clinical team, whether it's the genetic counselor or a social worker, please don't hesitate. And if you're looking for more information, Sharsheret is kicking off what we call our annual Sharsheret Summit. We have so many programs and activities that have already started across the country, but our national ones officially start the 19th, which is the day after Simchat Torah. And we have webinars on how to develop a positive, productive relationship with your oncology team. Then another one on the 24th, which is for anyone. It's a girlfriend's guide to breast cancer, right? So whether someone hasn't been diagnosed but wants to learn about signs and symptoms and risk-reducing behaviors, or someone has been recently diagnosed and has some basic questions, that's a great one. We have so much more. Go on our website, which is just sharsheret.org, and check out all the things coming up. And with that, I will thank you again and turn it back to Fran.
Actually, you'll turn it back to Ellen.
And I will turn it back to Ellen. That's what I meant.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting and enlightening program. And I'm sure we've all learned a great deal from you. And now I'd like to introduce Rabbi Ellen Walnutz-Field, Executive Director of Women's League for Conservative Judaism, for some words of wisdom.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Melissa, for an incredible evening. I've heard you speak previously, but this was really very powerful as always. And thank you to Fran and Ellen and to Mindy and the education, everybody who made this evening possible. Can't really be upbeat about this topic. Sorry, it hits too close to home. And I was actually the person who asked why Breast Cancer Awareness Month is in October, because the Jewish holidays, of course, are always in Tishrei, which could be in September or October, but inevitably it's close to the Jewish holidays, which really, they're all about our life that will be sealed into the book of life. One of the most powerful prayers that we recite during the time of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services is in Matana Tokef, who shall live and who shall die. It's not always in our power to control that. Sometimes it's not at all in our power. And it's just really, it hits me every year that right after we say those words, it's either Breast Cancer Awareness Month immediately then, or very soon afterwards. And then of course, what are we preparing for now is Sukkot. The holiday is Zman Simchatenu, the time of joy. Yet, I don't know about all of you, but I don't think there's been a year that our sukkah has not fallen over, has not collapsed. We were at our dear friend's house last year, too, and his sukkah, he had just gotten a new one. It was falling over. It was so sad. And that's what life is about. That here, Sukkot is about the fragility of life. We live in these huts for 7 days. Well, some people live in it, some people eat in it. But they're fragile, they're about to fall apart. And yet we're told Zman Simchatenu, that it's a time of joy. So even while you're trying to have a time of joy, your sukkah might be falling over. And that's life, that we have to enjoy each day, even though it is fragile. Some of us know that because of our genetic makeup, could be inevitable that we might get a cancer diagnosis. I don't think there's one person in the world who doesn't know somebody with a cancer diagnosis. Yet you can't live with that fear every day. You can't live with the fear during Sukkot that I'm going to build this gorgeous sukkah and it's going to fall over. You have to enjoy it. You have to have Zman Simchatenu, that you have to enjoy life to its fullest. I didn't put it on today, but I have a mantra band, one of these bracelets, and that says Carpe Diem, seize the day, that you have to really seize the day. And that's what Sukkot's all about, that even though it's fragile with all these Sukkot falling over, and that we just sang who shall live and who shall die. We didn't sing, kind of a singing, but we prayed it, that we still have to have that Zman Simchatenu, the time of joy. So I hope that every day is joyous, no matter what diagnosis you have, to just enjoy every single moment. And if there's a phrase in Aramaic, Adarabba, even the opposite. And if you don't have a diagnosis, even more so enjoy every single day. And enjoy every day and really have it as a simcha, a joy. And I know that looking around the boxes here of our Zoom call, it's truly a joy to see everybody coming together. So may we all have joyous Simchat Torah, but more so truly enjoy this second Shabbat of 5783. Thank you again for all being on with us. And Melissa, every time I speak to you, you're an inspiration. So Toda Rabah.
Thank you, Rabbi, for your insightful and interesting words. You've given us a lot to think about. They may not have been joyful, but they have been very thought-provoking. And I personally appreciate your honesty and directness, because I think we sometimes need that, you know? It becomes really easy to say certain kinds of things, and you really nailed a lot of things, at least for me personally, so thank you. And on that note, I'd like, on behalf of Mindy, Ellen, and myself, I'd like to again thank our presenter, Melissa Rosen, for her thoughtful presentation. And Melissa, I'm going to say that I could certainly personalize a lot of what you were discussing, and I feel like I learned an awful lot. And thank you so, so much. You will be receiving the information from Melissa and Sharsheret, and we will send it to you through WLCJ. Thank you also to Debbie and to Rabbi for your leadership and for being here. And Karen, Belena, we could not do this without you. So thank you very, very much. And to our audience, to our listening audience, thank you for attending tonight. Your questions were fabulous, and we thank you for coming. And we hope to see you again. A healthy and happy New Year. Chag Sukkot Sameach, which is coming up next week, very soon. So we take care and hope to see you again soon. Good night.
Night.
Good night.